if you constantly feel the need to explain yourself, defend your choices, prove your intentions, or convince people that you are not the person they think you are, then you may be giving away far more power than you realize. Because the moment you start desperately trying to control what another person thinks about you, you have already handed them control over your peace. The Stoics understood something that most people learn far too late. You do not need everyone to understand you. You need to understand yourself. And once you truly understand yourself, you stop chasing approval, stop arguing with every accusation, and stop feeling responsible for correcting every false opinion people have about you. That does not mean becoming rude. It does not mean becoming cold. And it certainly does not mean refusing to admit when you are wrong. It means learning when your words are necessary and when your silence is stronger. Today, we are going through 10 Stoic lessons that can help you stop explaining yourself and start reclaiming the power you have been giving away. 1. Stop trying to control other people's opinions of you. This is where everything begins. Think about how much energy people spend trying to manage their reputation. Someone misunderstands you, and you immediately want to explain. Someone criticizes your decision, and you feel the need to defend it. Someone assumes something about you, and suddenly you are preparing a 5-minute speech explaining what really happened. But ask yourself something. Can you actually control what that person decides to believe? Epictetus built much of his philosophy around this distinction. Some things are within our power, while other things are not. Our judgments, intentions, desires, and choices belong to us. Other people's opinions and reactions do not. That distinction changes everything. You can explain yourself perfectly, and someone can still misunderstand you. You can tell the truth, and someone can still accuse you of lying. You can have good intentions, and someone can still interpret them badly. You can live honestly, and someone can still dislike you. So why spend your life trying to control something that was never yours to control? Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reminded himself that the judgments people make belong to them. Your responsibility is not to make everyone think well of you. Your responsibility is to make sure your actions deserve your own respect. That is a much higher standard. Because when you live for approval, you become a prisoner of perception. But when you live according to your principles, you become much harder to manipulate. Let them misunderstand. Let them speculate. Let them form opinions. You do not have to attend every courtroom in which your name is mentioned. Your life is the evidence. 2. Understand that silence is not weakness. A lot of people are afraid of silence because they think silence means losing. They believe that if someone attacks them and they do not respond, they have allowed the other person to win. But that is not strength. That is insecurity looking for permission to react. There are moments when speaking is wise. There are also moments when speaking simply feeds the situation. Imagine someone makes a disrespectful comment about you. You respond. They respond again. You explain. They twist your explanation. You defend yourself again. Now you are angry. They are angry. And 20 minutes later, you are still discussing something that should have taken 5 seconds to ignore. Who actually gained from that conversation? The Stoic does not ask, "How can I make this person understand me?" The Stoic asks, "Does responding serve my character or my purpose?" Marcus Aurelius advised himself not to become consumed by what other people say, think, or do. He repeatedly returned his attention to his own conduct and responsibilities. That is the difference between reaction and discipline. Silence is powerful when it comes from clarity, not fear, not cowardice, not resentment, clarity. Sometimes the strongest response to an accusation is simply continuing to live in a way that makes the accusation irrelevant. You do not need to prove you are disciplined. Your discipline will become visible. You do not need to announce that you are loyal. Your loyalty will become visible. You do not need to tell everyone that you have changed. Your behavior will eventually tell the story for you. When your character becomes consistent, explanations become less necessary. 3. Do not defend every decision you make. There comes a point in life when you realize that not everyone deserves access to your reasoning. You do not owe everyone a detailed explanation of your choices. You changed careers. You do not have to convince everyone that it was the right decision. You ended a relationship. You do not have to provide the entire history. You decided to spend less time with certain people. You do not have to defend yourself in court. You started taking your health seriously. You do not need permission. You decided to become more private. You do not have to explain why. There is a difference between accountability and approval. Accountability means you are willing to examine your choices and accept their consequences. Approval means you need other people to agree with those choices before you feel comfortable making them. Stoicism demands the first and warns you away from becoming dependent on the second. Marcus Aurelius wrote about focusing on the work that belongs to you rather than becoming distracted by what other people are doing, saying, or thinking. That principle is incredibly relevant today, because modern life constantly invites you to perform your life for an audience. People announce their plans. People document their relationships. People defend their lifestyles. People argue with strangers. People explain why they made certain choices. And slowly, without realizing it, they begin living as though their life needs a public explanation. It does not. Your life is not a courtroom. You are allowed to make decisions quietly. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to grow beyond the version of yourself that other people became comfortable with. And you are allowed to walk away without writing a 10-page explanation. 4. Learn the difference between correction and criticism. Now here is where Stoicism becomes more mature. Never explaining yourself does not mean believing you are always right. That would not be Stoic. In fact, Marcus Aurelius specifically recognized the value of changing your opinion when someone gives you good reason to correct it. This is extremely important. There are two kinds of criticism. One deserves examination, the other deserves distance. Constructive criticism points toward your behavior. Destructive criticism attacks your identity. One says, "This decision may have caused a problem. Have you considered this?" The other says, "You always ruin everything." One gives you something to think about. The other tries to make you feel small. A strong person learns to separate the two. Do not reject useful criticism simply because it hurts your ego. But do not accept every insult simply because someone said it confidently. Ask yourself 3 questions. Is there truth in this? Is there something I can learn? And does this person actually have enough wisdom or knowledge about my situation for their opinion to deserve serious consideration? That last question matters. Not every opinion deserves equal weight. Marcus Aurelius understood that the quality of the person giving judgment matters. He warned himself against being overly concerned with praise or criticism from people who were not living according to sound principles themselves. So when someone criticizes you, do not immediately become defensive. Pause, listen, examine. If they are right, improve. If they are wrong, let the opinion remain with them. That is emotional discipline. 5. Stop confusing being understood with being respected. This is one of the hardest lessons to learn. Sometimes you desperately want someone to understand your intentions because you believe that if they understood your heart, they would treat you differently. But people do not always judge your intentions. They judge what they see through the lens of their own experiences, fears, insecurities, and beliefs. You can explain your heart for an hour and still not change their conclusion. And this is where many people exhaust themselves. They keep explaining because they think understanding will create respect. But respect does not always come from explanation. Sometimes it comes from consistency. If you repeatedly keep your word, people eventually. If you consistently behave with integrity, people eventually notice. If you remain calm when others expect you to explode, people eventually notice. If you refuse to participate in gossip, manipulation, or unnecessary conflict, people eventually notice. Your behavior has a language of its own, and it is often more convincing than your words. Marcus Aurelius placed enormous importance on living according to reason, justice, truth, and proper conduct rather than chasing reputation. That is the shift. Stop asking, "How do I convince them that I am a good person?" Start asking, "Am I behaving like the person I claim to be?" The second question is within your control. The first is not. 6. Do not let accusations decide your emotional state. Someone accuses you of something. Immediately, your heart starts racing. You become angry. You replay the conversation. You imagine what everyone else must be thinking. You start planning your response. But pause for a moment. What actually happened? An accusation was made. That is all. The accusation itself does not automatically become reality because someone said it loudly. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly examined the relationship between external events and our judgments about those events. He argued that our interpretation can intensify the disturbance we experience. This does not mean pretending that harmful actions do not matter. It means separating the event from the story you immediately attach to it. Someone insults you. That happened. They have destroyed my reputation. That is your interpretation. Someone rejects you. That happened. I am not good enough. That is your interpretation. Someone misunderstands you. That happened. I need to convince them immediately. That is your impulse. Stoic practice creates a pause between what happens and what you decide it means. And that pause is where your freedom lives. You cannot always control what people say, but you can control whether their words become the ruler of your emotional life. 7. Let your actions speak longer than your explanations. Think about the people you genuinely trust. Why do you trust them? Usually, not because they gave you a brilliant explanation of who they are. You trust them because you have watched them. You watched how they behaved when things became difficult. You watched whether they kept promises. You watched whether they treated people well when nobody important was watching. You watched whether their words matched their actions. Character is built through repetition. This is why constantly explaining yourself can actually weaken your position. The more you talk about what you intend to do, the less impressive it becomes when your actions do not follow. The Stoic approach is simpler. Do the work, keep your word, correct your mistakes, control your impulses, treat people fairly, walk away from what corrupts your character, and let time reveal the result. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly brought himself back to action, virtue, justice, and conduct rather than reputation. This is especially powerful as you get older. At some point, you realize that you do not need to win every conversation. You need to build a life you respect. You need relationships that are healthy. You need peace that is not dependent on applause. You need a character that does not collapse when someone disapproves. That is real power. 8. Stop explaining boundaries to people who benefit from crossing them. This lesson will change the way you deal with difficult people. There are people who genuinely do not understand your boundary, and there are people who understand it perfectly. They simply do not like it. Those are not the same thing. If you tell someone, "I am not available for this kind of conversation," and they continue pushing, another explanation may not solve anything. Because the problem is no longer a lack of information. The problem is a lack of respect. You do not need to keep explaining a boundary to someone who is committed to crossing it. Sometimes the boundary becomes real only when you enforce it. No argument, no dramatic speech, no long message, just action. You leave, you stop responding, you change the arrangement, you create distance, you protect your time, you protect your peace. This is not cruelty. It is responsibility. The Stoic does not seek conflict, but neither does the Stoic surrender inner freedom simply to avoid disappointing someone. Marcus Aurelius emphasized that your own ruling faculty remains yours even when external circumstances are difficult. Your peace cannot depend on everyone behaving exactly the way you want, but your boundaries can determine how much access their behavior has to your life. That is different. 9. Accept that some people will never see your side. This may be the most liberating lesson of all. Some people will never understand you, not because you failed to explain yourself properly, but because they have already decided what they want to believe. And once you understand that, you stop trying to solve impossible problems. You cannot reason someone out of a position they have emotionally committed themselves to protecting. You cannot force someone to interpret you fairly. You cannot make someone appreciate your intentions. You cannot make someone regret losing you. You cannot make someone admit that they were wrong. You cannot control their conscience. You can only control yours. This is where Stoicism becomes incredibly practical. Epictetus teaches that our judgments, intentions, desires, and responses belong to us, while reputation and other people's reactions do not. That means your job is not to win every person's approval. Your job is to live in a way that you can defend yourself. If you know you acted honestly, sleep peacefully. If you made a mistake, admit it. If you hurt someone, apologize. If you need to change, change. But once you have done what integrity requires, stop torturing yourself trying to control someone else's conclusion. There is a difference between taking responsibility and carrying responsibility that was never yours. Learn that difference. It will save you years of unnecessary emotional exhaustion. 10. Make your character your final explanation. Here is where everything comes together. The ultimate goal is not to become someone who never explains anything. The goal is to become someone who does not need constant external validation. There will be moments when you should explain yourself. If you made a mistake, explain it. If someone was genuinely harmed by your actions, take responsibility. If clarification prevents unnecessary damage, speak. Stoicism is not about silence for the sake of silence. It is about choosing your response deliberately instead of being controlled by impulse. The question is not, should I always explain myself? The better question is, what does this situation require from me? Sometimes it requires words. Sometimes it requires an apology. Sometimes it requires correction. Sometimes it requires action. And sometimes it requires silence. The mature person learns the difference. Marcus Aurelius wrote that if something is not right, do not do it. And if something is not true, do not say it. That is a powerful standard. Imagine living by it. You do not exaggerate to make yourself look better. You do not lie to protect your image. You do not manipulate people into approving of you. You do not pretend to be someone you are not. You do not chase people who have already decided to misunderstand you. You simply live honestly. And when your actions are consistent with your principles, your character becomes the explanation. You do not have to announce your strength. You demonstrate it. You do not have to announce your discipline. You practice it. You do not have to announce your growth. People will eventually see it. And if they do not, you continue anyway. Because your purpose was never to become impressive in the eyes of everyone else. Your purpose was to become worthy of your own respect. And that is the part people often miss about Stoicism. Stoicism is not about becoming emotionless. It is about becoming governed. You still feel anger. You still feel disappointment. You still feel rejection. You still feel the temptation to defend yourself. But you no longer allow every emotion to become an instruction. You can feel the urge to respond and still choose silence. You can feel misunderstood and still choose peace. You can feel insulted and still choose dignity. You can feel rejected and